Hello all of you lovely people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and you know what, I'm just going to cut to the chase here. This list is going to annoy some of you. Now, I work for the glorious emperors of YouTube, and as such I have to condone to their rules of thinking, titling videos in strange ways, videos over 10 minutes so I can afford a tin of beans every other week, and delivering them in a smarmy way to you lovely people. Well, actually, the last one's just a personal inflection, not actually YouTube's fault at all. Anyway, the entries on this list might not actually be considered the worst games of all time, but many were rightly critiqued for either being the worst in their series or having major flaws. So take this with a pinch of salt, as well as the fact that this is my opinion and I'm entitled to that as much as you are to critique it. Now, I am of the staunch belief that no video game developer sets out to make a bad game on purpose. But regardless, there's often so much time and thought that goes into even the crappiest of video games, meaning that occasionally you'll get some glimpses of brilliance from truly terry bad games. So let's celebrate these moments. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these were 9 amazing moments from the worst video games. Number 9. Beating a xenomorph to death. Alien Colonial Marines. Alien Colonial Marines didn't accomplish much. Well, apart from pissing off its fan base, that is. Its sales were low, it was surrounded by a huge amount of criticism, and the graphics paled in comparison to what was actually promised. And worst of all, for a game paying homage to a classic horror film like Alien, it wasn't scary in the slightest. This was largely down to the poorly scripted AI, which resulted in the xenomorphs aimlessly wandering around posing about as much of a threat as a comforting hug. Still, and despite its abundance of flaws, it did have one pretty amazing moment. During Mission 5, entitled The Raven, the player must escape the sewers and complete several other objectives while battling a horde of xenomorphs, and the scene culminates with you jumping into a power loader and beating the absolute piss out of the alien with punches and kicks. This is an incredibly satisfying conclusion, especially when you consider that for the bulk of the game the player is forced to use various weapons to slay the aliens, but seldom is presented with the opportunity to go toe to toe with one. So you know what? Take that! Why won't you a better game? Number 8. Illusia, Resident Evil 6. So let's get this straight. Resi 6 is the worst entry in the mainline Resi series. I mean, how can you argue with that? I mean, sure, there are some moments of greatness like Leon's campaign, but it's just so fractured and it changed the formula so much for the worse and basically tried to be Devil May Cry in places that it just felt like a game that copied down all the right elements, but then threw these pages into the bin. And it worries me so much that this is one of the best-selling of this entire franchise. I mean, it's lucky that we got a hard reset with the Resi 2 remake, right? However, in amongst all of the stupid flippy bollocks and weird on-your-back turtle shooting, there was one moment that managed to act as a true callback to the earliest titles, and that was the boss battle with Illusia, a serpentine creature that could barely be seen. Its invisibility-like qualities allowed some sense of dread and terror to sink deep within the player as they realized that they could only see it when it opened its mouth up just before an attack, offering a soul moment that truly felt like Resident Evil. Plus, it almost felt like a callback to Yawn the Snake, and that is always a good thing. Number 7. The opening level, Duke Nukem Forever. Seriously, Duke Nukem is an absolute arsehole. I know that it's meant to be a gimmick, and you know what? I'm old enough to have actually grown up watching his flat-top, meat-headed antics since the beginning. But while the world moved on and made his shtick look archaic, he decided to drill down on things that were once edgy and are now just so cringy. Plus, the wait for Duke Nukem Forever all but killed his chances of a true comeback. He became a self-fulfilling prophecy, destined to fall under the weight of expectations, leaving his member to shrivel like it had been a very cold shower outside in Antarctica. Still, I have to admit, that opening level of the game was actually pretty brilliant. And by brilliant, I mean that it leant so hard on the juvenile antics of drawing dicks and throwing poo and mocking franchises better than its own that Duke Nukem entered such obvious self-parody that you couldn't help laugh with it and also at it. Plus, that showdown with the boss in the football stadium was exactly the type of encounter that fans wanted, as it was the action that backed up the bro-heavy posturing. However, as soon as this section ended and the real game began, it was all downhill from there. Number 6. Kylo Ren, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, to be clear, Battlefront 2 as it is today is a much, much better game than the skip fire that EA tried to palm off on everyone when it first released. And yet, outside of the multiplayer loot box bonanza, we got a standalone single player, which also failed to stick the landing. It was at least an original story detailing the adventures of an imperialist turned rebel, and it was interesting on paper because it was one of the rare moments that fans were promised to see what the Empire looked like from the inside. However, we barely got a glimpse of this when we turned into a rebel not 3 missions in. However, there was a proper boy popper in the form of the attempts to bridge this game into the main canon. Case in point, when Kylo Ren appears to interrogate Del about Lor San Tekka's location, who owned the map that showed where Luke Skywalker was. For many, this was unexpected and allowed for a small moment of excitement in an otherwise short, bleak and rather lacking experience. It's a shame it was over and done with before it really got going. Number 5. The soundtrack, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a classic feel-good film adored by the masses. Its video game counterpart, however, is not. It was, at the time, a modern-day failure that somehow managed to make the franchise look bad. Really bad. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a riddled mess from start to finish and served more as an interactive experience than anything remotely stimulating, because even the puzzles were pretty much spelled out for the players. The graphics were subpar and everyone seemed to look like Resident Evil bioweapons for how strangely they moved. Still, the accompanying soundtrack managed to deliver where the visuals could not. It matched the tempo, atmosphere, and general mood of each area or cutscene perfectly. It is actually remarkable to see that in a game designed so poorly that the composers could still deliver on a scale that made each section bloom. It's still a stinker everywhere else though. Number 4. The opening scene, 50 Cent Bulletproof. The fact that 50 Cent Bulletproof, like the previous entry, even exists is as perplexing as it is amazing. I don't know why he has a game nor how it got a sequel, and opinion on both of these titles is divided to say the least. Beyond the hokey concept, the first game was just so unpolished. One example is the shooting mechanic, which rarely worked as intended. And this is a shooter. You kind of bloody need that. But yet, no one can deny that it didn't have a brilliant opening hook. In the opening cutscene, we flicker between both real and virtual 50 Cent, one being in a music video and the other brawling around New York fighting criminals and federal agents with both his fists and his weapons. It sets the tone so well that people were immediately hyped for what followed. It's just a shame that what followed was, well, less than stellar. Number 3. Axel is a double agent. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. Kingdom Hearts is a world-renowned franchise that has achieved much success under the guidance of mastermind Tetsuya Nomura. Yet one of the crucial problems that he faced in the earliest days of the series was just how much story he wanted to tell. And it turns out the answer was a lot of story. Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 both received critical acclaim on the PlayStation 2, but in between the pair, Chain of Memories released on the Game Boy Advance. As you might expect, going from the PS2 to a handheld console meant that sacrifices had to be made in the way of graphics and mechanics. Rather than the action-based, free-flowing combat that fans had become acquainted with, it instead offered turn-based combat using cards, a format that was never used again in Kingdom Hearts, might I add. It was an experience that many rallied against because of how little spectacle it offered, but there was one shining moment that actually went on to define the franchise. Organization 13 member Axel turns out to be a double agent and, drumroll, AIDS Namine, who then meets protagonist Sora before setting up the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2. This introduction and double turn was a brilliant way of hyping up fans while actually managing to tell an important moment using emotion rather than graphical wizardry. Number 2. Crushing an entire team, Evolve. Now, my thoughts on Evolve can be summed up in the same way that my exes probably would describe my lovemaking. Fun at first, but it all just boils down to trying to bring the big guy out of his hole long enough to do the job, and it becomes a boring slog. Oh, and you also get charged for the most unsatisfying cosmetics ever. And yet, throughout all of this, the first time that you play as one of these hulking behemoths and crush a team to dust is one of the most satisfying experiences around. Landing with the force of a truck, scattering the team, exploding with one of your superpowers, and then feasting on their remains is an adrenaline-fueled romp unequaled in gaming. Well, the first time round, that is, as after this, the old walking and stalking gets so tiring that you might find the monster asleep by the time that you actually catch up to it. And number 1, the opening level, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is an awful video game. It isn't just considered the worst game from the series, but one of the worst, and say it with me kids, of all time. The voice acting is beyond bad. The mechanics are awkward and the plot doesn't make any reasonable sense, even for a series with a fictional hedgehog. I mean, really, how is Sonic meant to kiss this princess and do the things that hedgehogs do with this face and anatomy? It's just so not Sonic. Plus, Amy would absolutely brain this princess if she ever saw this. Still, and looking beyond its inherent flaws, there is one gem that can be found beneath the mountain of unpolished rocks. The opening level, which oozes classic Sonic vibes on a three-dimensional scale and is spectacularly fun throughout. It's the one example that you can tell the team actually put some effort into. It's just a shame that the moment that the game moves on from this, that it all falls apart. Wave Ocean is a thoroughly enjoyable episode, and the accompanying music is so soothing it makes you feel as though you could just sit blazing around this level for hours on end. But just hold on to that feeling, my dudes, because the rest of the title has none of this charm. And there we go, my friends. Those were 9 amazing moments from the worst video games. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. This entire list can be summed up as basically looking for brilliant things in bad situations. And I know from personal experience and from speaking to friends that sometimes life can be so unfair that it feels like there will be no moment of happiness or respite in it. But I promise you, things can always be turned around. No matter what situation you are in, with the support of friends, family, and professionals in the support industry, you can take your situation and move on from it. Yes, there still might be hardships ahead. Yes, you may still experience pain. It is a long road to recovery, but you can get there because we believe in you and want you to do well. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. And if you want to try something a bit different, then why not swing by my Live and Let Dice board game channel over here on YouTube. But always remember, you have been awesome. Never forget that. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye.